Joseph Rykwert and the Humanities of Bill Heritage. And in the afternoon, we also have lined up for another 10 or so exciting, famous speakers all around the world. Yeah. And in fact, in the afternoon, I think we have a panel with speakers from the region, from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, and the region. And then followed by a session with speakers from Europe, from the UK, from Italy, and also Australia. So welcome back. Now, the first speaker in the afternoon is somebody which I also mentioned in my opening. Yeah. Because of him, I came to know Joseph, and he gave me the advice to study PhD with Joseph in Cambridge after my 3 years architect's career in Toronto. Yeah. And Professor David Long, of course, he was, in fact, we knew each other for a long time. I actually was my first summer intern when I came back from Cornell, was actually working for an architect called Tao Ho, while David, in fact, was the associate in charge of the office. So that's how we met. And then we kept a friendship over the years, which later on he referred me to Joseph, and then changed my whole life journey. Right. So thank you, David, for coming here. Of course, David is a distinguished professor from the University of Hong Kong, but now he's a chair professor at the Tsui College, still maintaining his honorary professorship at the university. Yeah. So it's all for yours. Thank you, David.
Good afternoon. Actually, I can go home because Desmond has spoken everything. Desmond and I were having lunch in August this year, and we talked about Joseph. And 2 months later, he informed me of Joseph's passing. It is very thoughtful of Desmond to organize this event today to enable us, for those who know Joseph from different parts of the world, to come together to celebrate his life. Desmond and I were colleagues at Hong Kong U Architecture in the 1990s, and it was he who brought Joseph to lecture at Hong Kong U and also took Joseph to China. And I came to know Joseph back in 1977. It was during my writing of my master thesis in 1976 or 77-ish, can't remember exactly. Don Genasi, then a teacher at the AEA, and study history and theory with Joseph at Essex. He returned to teach at Oregon. Some of you may know Don. And I was assigned to him as his teaching assistant, as well as my thesis supervisor. Perhaps it was the 8 pages written on the origin of Chinese town planning in The Idea of a Town that was published in 1976 had such a profound influence on Don that he propelled me through the writing of my thesis via the reading of ancient Chinese classical text on the early formation of Chinese town planning and ancient Chinese architecture. Many of my readings then, with names such as Whitley, Watson, Creel, were also used in The Idea of a Town. After my return from the US in 1978, I joined Tao Ho Design in Hong Kong, a private practice where I met Desmond, then as a summer intern. Subsequently, Desmond moved to Toronto, where he practiced architecture with Barton Myers. And it was then, I believe, in the early 1980s, I visited him in Toronto and tried to lure him to study his PhD under Joseph in Cambridge. And the rest is history. Desmond already told you the story. Joseph have played a significant role in my academic career. He and I became acquainted when he came to lecture at Oregon in 1977. A staunch teaching assistant, my task was to look after Joseph during his week-long visit, and we had many lengthy conversations broadly on culture and civilization. Though not a direct student of Joseph, I visited him during my trips to London in his Hampstead home. On one occasion, he jokingly asked how I was given the name David by my parents. He asked as if I had any Jewish ancestry. As he suspected, I might have come from the 11th century Song dynasty Jewish community in Kaifeng. Joseph was generous in sharing with me his profound knowledge, all of which only a small fraction I could follow. Joseph is a giant. He played a significant part in each of our lives here today for those who are sharing his legacies, and Joseph will be fondly remembered. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next presenter is Professor Lu Hueimin, who comes especially from Taiwan for this occasion. She is professor at the Graduate Institute of Landscape Architecture and Recreation Management of the Pingtung University of Science and Technology in Taiwan. And she obtained her MArch and PhD in architecture from UPenn, where he met Joseph. Yeah. And her field is in cultural heritage and ecological landscapes. So, Professor Lu, thank you.
2022, like November 13, I went to his house to meet him. And he is so clear. And I talked him about Michelangelo, and he said, "You are so ambitious." Today, I will talk about Michelangelo because the seminar that he is attending is on body and building. So after I think the book that his body and building is because the at that time that he's was the same as we have the seminar on body and building, and he writing the book about that. So at that time I write Michelangelo architecture body and building. So today I would like to present this paper, write more about to memorize him. So I don't talk too much about what Joseph Rykwert said, because so many people hasn't talked about that. So now I'll just talk about body and building on Michelangelo architecture. The idea of body prevailed in the medieval time is the zodiac man, coordinating time, temper, virtue, cosmic elements, many astrological thinking. No hints for architecture or architectural thinking. The history of acquisition of the relation between body and building before Michelangelo can be relatively clear by introducing some major figures: Vitruvius in the classical period, Villa di Holoncourt, 13th century in the medieval time, and the interpreters of Vitruvius in the Renaissance, such as Francesco di Giorgio and Alberti, etc. The body ideas induced as body and proportion, odors, the ideas can be induced as body and proportion, odors, body and metaphor, body and geometry, on circle and square, from building to city. The obsession of the body metaphor in architectural theory was apparent in the only surviving Roman treatise by Vitruvius. It was mainly concerned with setting the standards of a building through perfect proportion supported by understanding the origin of orders and the meanings of ornament to columns. From studying the changing ideas of body and building in architecture of great figures such Brunelleschi, 1377 to 1446, Alberti to Michelangelo, 1475 to 1564, we can see how the evolution of Renaissance architecture within these 115 years. Firstly, body was always the source of Michelangelo's architectural invention. The idea of monstrosity, explained in the 4 dialogue on paintings, was derived from the idea of employing grotesque ornamentation. This was key for him to enter the architectural world of discovery. Secondly, anatomy, one of the obsession among architects and artists in the 16th century, provided him with the framework for the relationships in architecture to each profession. This anthropomorphic thinking extended to the reasoning of form making between structure, joint, articulation of space and the surface by proportion and ornamentation. The third kin of body is the experiencing body. Architecture is the tool to fulfill desire of the nature of bodily experience. The idea of monstrosity. The idea of monstrosity was revealed in the 3rd dialogue in 4 dialogue on painting by Francesco della Hollanda, seeing impossible and contrary to reason, with the composition of grotesques, which reveals the potentiality form, prototype, perfect according to its nature, breaking the classical language as a canon set by his predecessor. As Michelangelo says above, the reason to paint a monstrosity is to relax the senses, to satisfy the desire of seeing what one has never seen, which means to provoke the imagination into seeing things differently. He wanted to execute the work in imitation of old sacristy laid by Filippo Brunelleschi, but with different decorative features. And so he did ornamentation in a composite order, in a style more varied and original than any other master, ancient or modern, has never been able to achieve. Furthermore, so there's some comparison between new sacristy and old sacristy. We won't get in detail into that. And this is a new sacristy of Michelangelo. So we can see his sketch among the idea of monstrosity that prevailed the decoration and the space of new sacristy. Furthermore, another aspect of monstrosity is its contradiction in terms of spatiality. The humorous gigantic stairway stretched out in the rather comparatively compressed vestibule of the Laurentian Library was a cynical play of contrary and impossible proportion of space. The monstrosity is a key for the skillful designer with the capacity to solve the contradiction in order to reveal either side of quality of space. The idea of the grotesque gives the designer freedom to reveal his intention according to nature. The canon of perfection, perceived as the incomplete completeness. Therefore, the monstrosity is a key of architectural freedom for one desiring to enter the world of invention. During the process of discovery of architecture, the factor of incidental design retained by juxtaposing overlapping multiple images plays an influential role for the modification of each future design. Subsequently, the interweaving ambiguity of figure and architectural form constantly respond to each other. The meaning and the content of body interact and immune each other with those of building and eventually change the qualitative course of the design. We may declare it is a meta-anthropomorphosis on architecture. The anthropomorphic thinking for Michelangelo revolution of form is to imitate the profile of the face, as well as to infuse space personality into architecture as a man possesses his own personality. In a drawing of the study of a base profile for the Medici Chapel, Michelangelo wrote about the mortality of Duke Giuliano. When drawing this profile, he must have been inspired by thinking about the virtue of Giuliano. By dotting an eye on the drawing, and a vivid face of Giuliano was revealed in the form of molding. This drawing with writing and sketches of profile demonstrates the visual with verbal trope between body and building. Anatomy. As defined today, anatomy is the science of structure of the human body. The word itself is derived from the Greek, simply meant dissection. It signifies a method of research rather than a degree of knowledge. In 1543, Vesalius, De Humani Corporis Fabrica was published. Of the Vesalian treatise, suppose the analogy of architecture and anatomy, utilizing the term fabric with regard to its structural definition. Those anatomical drawings could be translated to Rusconi's architectural drawings. The dissecting became the habit of researching buildings. According to Frascari, in Rusconi's drawings, completed 1553, we witness the same representational procedure. The bodies of buildings are exposed through successive stages of dissection as they become stripped of their plastery skins to show the structural skeleton. Like anatomical figures, the ruin, the dissected architectural body by the knife of time and the natural forces exposed its flesh of construction materials, as well as an anatomist could use a knife cutting through the human body to gain the anatomical knowledge. The Renaissance architects could witness the operated architectural ruin to understand the ancient method of construction. The kinds of parallel visual image prevalent in 16th century Italy. One is the anatomical drawing. The other is dissecting ruin. Another is the illustration of dissected architectural body, just as the anatomical drawing. The anatomical representation of ancient architecture from texts or from the ruin both bear the bleeding character of action through dissecting mentally and physically. An anatomist, architect, or an archaeologist is able to conceive the invisible hidden strata. A new visual attempt, which Michelangelo undoubtedly also possessed, was discovered by Renaissance humanists in order to establish the opera madness of construction as an ontological ground for architecture at anatomical representation of artifacts. Michelangelo's acquisition of knowledge of anatomy occurred in his youth and later in his old age. According to Condevi in 1494, Michelangelo's first activity engaged in human dissection in the crypt of Santo Spirito. Michelangelo collaborated as early as 1548 on an anatomical treatise which his friend Ridolfo Clomo was preparing with an eye to supplementing Galen and Vesalius. Parocchi demonstrates that the preface to the first chapter could also surface as a structure to an architectural treatise, as Colomo comparatively relates the human structure to the architectural suppose. Although Michelangelo did not really get involved in his work, the analogy between structure, a body, and a building must have been shared by Michelangelo. The architectural members derive from human members. On the other hand, unlike Vitruvius' quantitative analogy for the numerical proportion, Michelangelo made a relational and qualitative analogy in terms of parts and whole, the center, and the relation of correspondence of various parts in architecture is analogous to the appearance of a human figure. Through mastering anatomy, one can understand the architectural principle as the center and the symmetry and the relationship between parts and whole. The above later generally was used to explain the project of St. Peter's Church. Its plan has the principle of symmetry as in the human figure. Moreover, the construction of architectural members such as the piers, vault, drum, and dome assimilate the principle of assembling a human skeleton and its appendage, as well as constitute a structural relation of support, rest, compression, tension. The ideal anatomy lies in the understanding of constitute relations between those anatomical elements, brains, bone, nerve, muscle, and flesh of the human body. The diagonal outer faces of the piers bound the hemicycles of close to the angles of the square. As explained by Ackermann, Michelangelo interpreted these diagonals as building elements, as muscles, not the limits of the regular polygon. The process of resembling skeletons to close flesh, a reverse and anatomical dissection as a process of reconstructing the human body can be an analog process of constructing a building. The idea of ornament constrained by the building skeleton as the idea of clothes for one to express himself is to reveal the social and aesthetic expression of architecture. Alberti had pointed out that making a facade can be analogous to resembling the fill-in of flesh on a skeleton. Michelangelo's early projects for the tomb of Julius and the facade of San Lorenzo reflected this idea. In the project of 1516, the articulation of the surface of facade by each figure contained the statue column with body metaphor of struggle and burden, supported by a Pliny's relatively displayed bone flesh image. Similarly, the facade for the San Lorenzo, commissioned in 1517, shows the action of resembling an image of skeleton with flesh panel, which is retained through his various sketches. Vision body in motion. One of the relations of anatomy and architecture for Michelangelo in the field of architectural drawing is its use as research method as discussed previously. Another was rare perfection by representing the anatomical reality of movement. This is his ultimate goal. Michelangelo's enthusiasm for movement first explored by Vasari. Michelangelo emphasized the bodily perception in a space constituted by layers of rather than the distant perspective eye projection. The body moves through the layers with the dissecting eye into the interior of architecture, reveal the invisible. In a drawing of San Giovanni Fiorentini, four wandering eyes, being the generators of design, are coordinating points for this interlocked geometric dome space. The four concave walls draw the center diagonally out to the periphery and at the same time concentrate on the center called by the eyes. The compression and the tension force are aroused by the interplay between two axes of the structural space, opposed to its contemporary perspective thinking in which body and eyes are static and distant. Michelangelo carried out those psychological effects by visual perception and bodily movement, visual body emotion, nurturing and amused by expressing an experience. Body, vision, emotion, Michelangelo at the same time reveal the sensuality in architecture and evokes the senses body experience. And I will finish the lecture. I won't explain too much about Cappadocia. And the book that I want to present to him is this book called All the Indigenous Settlements in the Itaq River Basin. This is my book just published, but I couldn't really present to him because he's been passed away. But finally, I finished the book and dedicated to Joseph Rykwert. And this is the final for today. Thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hueimin. Thank you for your presentation. So our next speaker is Professor Raymond Quek from Singapore. He's actually a professor of architecture in the UK, but born in Singapore and studied at the Liverpool University, where he won the Charles Rayleigh Medal, and then he obtained a Cambridge Commonwealth Trust Scholarship to pursue postgraduate work at Clare Hall, Cambridge, where he studied, I think, under Dalrymple Wesley. Yeah, he read the history and philosophy of architecture, and then afterwards he taught in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the UK, and he's the founder of the Association of Architectural Educators in UK, which hosts the journal Charette and facilitates conferences on education. So, Raymond, is all yours. Thank you. Thank you, Raymond. Now, our next presenter is Lawrence Mak. And Lawrence, as I have mentioned earlier, is my student, and so the student of the Mark, and later obtained a MSc in conservation at HKU. So, Lawrence.
Thank you, Desmond.
Yep.
Here you go. Is it showing? Oh, great. Okay, thank you. It's my greatest honor to be here today, joining, paying tribute to Joseph Rykwert. And although I'm not a direct student of Professor Rykwert, Rykwert did influence deeply to my two great teachers, Desmond Hui, Professor Desmond Hui, and Professor David Long. Both are my two great teachers. And they will also appear in the projects I'm going to talk about later on. They gave us a lot of advice. Oops. We get back. Yeah, but I use the keyboard to control. Can we show the PowerPoint again? Yep. Just click this. Great. Okay, I'll just use the keyboard. It's a better way, probably. It still doesn't move. Can I use page down? Yes, yes, that's the key. So today I will share my conservation projects in the Urban Renewal Authority. And it's about built heritage and urban renewal in high-density Hong Kong. I believe the adaptive reuse projects we do in the URA in Hong Kong is highly related to the high density, and that produces a lot of interesting phenomena whereby we have a very special way to deal with the adaptive reuse projects. I will start with a very simple quote. Mixed use is what cities are all about. If you don't have mixed use, you don't have cities. In fact, Hong Kong is a very mixed and very eclectic city, and so does urban renewal. In the urban renewal projects, we often came across where we need to revitalize and preserve the buildings and open to the public. So in a lot of cases, it's not being used again as the original use. We have to open it up to different functions and different needs of the local community. And that gives a very special character of the projects. A bit about the URA. We are a statutory organization. We operate under a URA ordinance with a urban renewal strategy. And preservation is among one of the four main business of the URA. That is redevelopment, rehabilitation, preservation, and revitalization. Now, I will try to explain with three projects that I've done in the URA. This is a map of the Hong Kong's urban area. The first one I will talk about is the Central Market. And the second one is the 618 Shanghai Street project in Mong Kok. And the third one is the M7 Mallory Street in Wan Chai. So let's start with the first one, the Central Market project. It's located very strategically in Central, and actually you can see the uphill escalator going up all the way from Victoria Harbour to mid-levels in Hong Kong Island. And it goes right through the Central Market as well as other very famous tourist spots or places like the Tai Kwun and the Soho area. The whole thing starts in 2009 when the government has launched a Conserving Central initiative in which Central Market is one of the buildings which is to be conserved. And the URA was tasked to revitalize the Central Market building. The building was built in 1930s, and it was one of the most innovative buildings in Hong Kong when you compare to the other street markets in the local area. You can see it's a very modern and innovative building. When the building was handed over to the URA, it was in a very dilapidated stage, and you can see all the interiors and all the rundown of the existing building. And we immediately started a community engagement exercise led by Professor David Long. There's a community advisory committee, and we extensively engaged community with a lot of workshops, exhibitions. We produced different notional schemes to test what the public would like. And finally, we adopted a minimal approach to the building itself. But of course, there would be certain areas that we need to convert and suit modern day's use. So actually, we assigned different uses to each floor, and we have converted a number of components to suit today's new uses. One of the most important things is that we have to retain the uphill escalator systems, which pass right through the heart of this building. There are several character-defining elements in the building that we have preserved. Starting from the left is the facade, and then there are two grand stairs in the building that we have to carefully conserve. And then there were of course, this is the market stall because this is the market building. And then we have the atrium in the center and the column grid, because it's a modernist building. It has the column grid that we have to preserve. And this is how they look after the preservation. And I will go through one by one quickly. The first is the facade. You can see originally the building has a very smooth and horizontal linear facade all around the building. But in the 1980s, the government has started building this uphill escalator system, and it chopped off the front part of the building and to accommodate a pair of escalators connecting to the walkway. And therefore, at the end, we try to restore the essence of the original facade by continuing the original horizontal lines, but then provided a very modern finish with a glass curtain wall, which showcased the escalators as being part of the very important historical change. And we preserve a lot of the horizontality of the facade with the lighting, which emphasizes the underside of the horizontal fins at night. Now, the second character-defining element was the grand stairs. On the left, you can see the original look of the stairs. And on the right, we have carefully restored the Shanghai plaster and finishing of the stairs, while we carefully introduced the new railing system to fulfill the current regulation requirement without really intervening too much into the original fabric of the stairs. Now, the third element are the market stores. As you can see, we will... we have preserved a number of those existing stores which are in better condition, and we locate them to different parts of the building according to the circulation route, so that most of the visitors will be able to enjoy and look at those stores. Now, the fourth one was the atrium. Originally, it was the atrium to store all the bicycles, etc. Now we have turned it into a landscaped area for public enjoyment.
Here is a good bet, huh? So this is the last of them, isn't he? Yeah.
Lawrence, could you mute your microphone? Could you mute your microphone? Yeah. Thank you.
see, well, clearly missing the bat for me anyway. And the umpire says, all right, well, you're off, so great.
Lawrence Nield,
Did he, Mitch Marsh? So
yeah. Can you mute your microphone? We can hear your.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Striker.
Now, the fifth one was the column grid. Originally, the column grid was placed in relation to the market stalls, but after we have taken a lot of the market stalls, we need to preserve the feel of this space through this column grid. But of course, it has turned into different uses. For example, the one on the photo on the right shows the 24-hour passageway, which connects to the uphill escalator system. Oh, can we go to the next slide? No, it doesn't work. Let's wait for the keyboard. Okay. So to conclude for Central Market, we have made several changes to this historical building to turn the building itself into a mixed-use element. For example, we have restored the essence of the facade, and we have allowed the uphill escalator system as a newer component of the building, but yet being a very integral part of the whole context. Now, the second project I would like to talk about is the 618 Shanghai Street. It's located in Mong Kok, a very vibrant commercial area on Kowloon side. The URA has conducted a historical study and found that there were only 2 continuous rows of shop houses left in Hong Kong. So this project is for us to acquire the entire shop house row and to ensure that it won't be destroyed and further developed into very small, tiny residential towers. So Mong Kok is a historical part of the Kowloon Peninsula. These are the historical photos around the Second World War. It has been a very common view that the street was lined with 2 sides of the veranda of the residential buildings in the past. But now the Shanghai Street project was probably one of the last remaining clusters of shop houses. When we started the project, there were 14 lots, but among them, 2 clusters had already been redeveloped into residential buildings in the 1970s. Our aim is to preserve the essence of this entire cluster of shop houses. This is the look of the cluster when we've commenced the project back in 2009. And another aerial view, you can see it's already surrounded by later developments since the 1960s and 70s and all the way up to 20-something. There's a large commercial development called the Langham Place right across the road on the upper part of this photo. So we started with a lot of options, how much we are going to intervene the cluster in order to preserve its essence. So finally, we came up with a solution that we think is the most optimal in preserving the important elements. Now, this is the state of the cluster when we started the project. Taking out the 2 later added on residential buildings, we've identified that the front veranda of the shop house road would be most important. as well as the last pair of the buildings, which is hatched in red. Now we are going to demolish the parts at the rear of the shophouse cluster with a more dilapidated condition, and we provide with a new annex. Which also stores all the new requirements under the current building regulation. Under the two, we developed newer annexes, which has the same height as the residential buildings that were built in the 1960s and 70s. That is in order to preserve the look of this cluster up to the commencement of this project. Because we believe that is also a historical change to that cluster. And we also added new canopies to the front of the newly provided annex blocks in order to provide a similar environment as the covered walkways under the veranda. And last but not least, it's the so-called back street. Originally, these shophouse clusters had one main facade facing Shanghai Street to the left of the drawing. But on the right of the drawing, we found there's an opportunity to treat it as a second elevation, because the back street has already been becoming more vibrant through the years with the local shops being opened. Now, the final product is like in the photo. We have preserved the height profile of the entire block, and we have conserved and revitalized the pre-war historical portion, and as well as the veranda on ground floor. And this is the back street I was talking about. We've made use of the opportunity to provide another elevation so that it matches the current context of Mong Kok. It's being a more vibrant area for young people, some shops and restaurants, cafes, and it's also overlaid from different views. It overlays with the newer high-rise buildings in Mong Kok. And from this photo, you can see we have tried to preserve elements of different years. Actually, this pair of shop houses built in the 1930s had undergone various degrees of intervention and conversion by different owners. So in the process, we sort of take out the layers and layers of history, and we try to present it back to show different layers of historical changes. Such as all these columns, and when we take off some advertisement panels, it reveals the inside, which is another layer of advertisement, but it's like a 1950s or 40s. And we have preserved the space underneath the veranda. Now it comes to the third project, is the M7 Mallory Street project in Wan Chai. It's located in the old Wan Chai area. It was originally called the greenhouse because it has been acquired by government to provide shelter for the people in need, and they used the surface paint from the other departments to paint the external wall. So there's a nickname, it's called greenhouse. And we have adaptively reused the whole cluster into a new art theme development to provide various types of exhibition space, small shops, retails, and F&B related to art. And thanks to Professor Desmond Hui, in the early days, he had provided a lot of advice for us, which came up with this operational model of an art commune. Now, this is the other side, the Borough Street. It has also been conserved, but mainly the facade of that cluster. I'll tell you why later on. Now, this is the way we've we've intervened the whole project. It was originally 2 clusters of shop houses sitting back to back across a scavenging lane. But in the town planning requirement, it was zoned an open space, which is very contradictory. So the URA in the process during the planning, we have been required to provide 300 square meters of open space in the project. So we have to make a judgment or a comparison by studying the condition of the current shop houses. And after a structural survey, we have determined that the backside of the Barrow Street block was in a more dilapidated state. So we have to take that portion out and retain the veranda part of the front facade of the Barrow Street block and provide this 300 square meters of public open space. But then it's a cluster of buildings built in the 1920s. In order to provide all these electrical, mechanical, and fire escape requirements for current regulation, we have to take out also part of the Mallory Street block and provide an annex block at the back, which also houses all these new requirements, as well as providing a pair of buttresses you can see in the middle of the open space, over the open space to support the retained portion of the Barrow Street block. Okay, so that is the overall outlook of the project we have completed, and also the internal structure. We have also done a lot of work to conceal all those structural strengthening. But then when you come to this project today, you will still feel it as if it's a 1920s piece of architecture. And we have also painstakingly concealed all the electrical mechanical requirements. And just a few snapshots of the space that we have provided. It's overlaid with layers of history and the environment. For example, you can appreciate the tile roof in close proximity. It echoes well with the residential community in the area. And we have let various types of small shops and art-related business come in. And this is the open space, multifunctional. We can conduct all sorts of performances, concerts, outdoor cinemas, and even very special events in the open space. So to conclude, the Urban Renewal Authority's conservation project in Hong Kong's high-density environment will often need to provide different components in the space or the location of this project, as well as a mixed use in the excess of time. So that's how I relate mixed use with what Professor Rykwert's quote on mixed use. Thank you.
So Lawrence, thank you. And I'm sure, if Joseph would have been alive and see these projects, he would be very pleased. All right, so our next speaker, before we have the tea break, is Professor Jin Ying from University of Cambridge. And Ying actually started his PhD in the same year that I went to Cambridge. So we started actually at the same time. And we became friends actually ever since. And we remember very vividly in the year 1989 when Ying actually returned to China in Beijing. We were all very actually in the UK and Cambridge, the whole community of friends. And then when he returned, we were so happy. And Ying actually is now the professor at the department. And he's a professor of architecture and urbanism. And he would share with us, his study and learning from Joseph. Ying, thank you.
Thank you very much, Desmond. Well, it's a great and brilliant event with global coverage, and I'll be quite brief because I'm aware that I'm the person between you and tea and coffee. Well,
Take
Desmond
your time.
also
Don't worry. You have 15 minutes.
I actually my script is very short anyway. Desmond, also congratulations upon your appointment as a CIPSH chair at the Hansen University. I'm very delighted to hear this appointment. It's so good to see so many scholars on this event. Those whom I already know, like Lily, Jill, Neil, Bob, who's going to be speaking just after the break, and Desmond, of course, and many more who I have read but not have met yet in person. So I look forward to meeting you on some other occasion. It was Joseph's Cambridge lectures that have first introduced me to his writings on cities. And at the time, his writings always attracted me because of its lucid explanations of the relationship between the designer and the citizenry. But I was working at a time on my PhD on urban mathematical modeling, which Joseph would call the functional and the technological aspects, and not something that he particularly cared for. On my part, since I had read so little as well, I really didn't know what to make of Joseph's writings. I did attend Joseph's classes, but my questions must have greatly disappointed him from time to time. Over the years since then, as I worked through projects of city planning and infrastructure planning in different parts of the world, I started to get a better sense and better perspective of Joseph's ideas about cities and city life. I came to appreciate more his writing on cities and how cities are built, the relationship between the humans and the concrete forms of buildings, neighborhoods, and infrastructure. Joseph's emphasis upon the value of the human and the symbolic started to make much more sense to me as I came to see for myself in my project how big decisions about cities were made much more through people's beliefs rather than through their rational mathematical calculations, which is a great lesson to me. Given this, and even very commonly accepted scientific concepts like the need for transport investment or the need to reduce carbon emissions induced by humans are only making an impact through changing people's beliefs rather than simply sort of relying on the mathematical evidence of actually what's been happening. On the whole, human beliefs work much more effectively than rational arguments, especially in these populist times. Human beliefs can achieve what science and technology cannot. And this is, again, something that Joseph has repeatedly reminded us, actually, through his writings. Joseph's ideas are therefore of increasing importance as the architectural discipline confronts its great flux at the moment in education and in professional practice. And we all have to face up with that in our teaching, in our practice. And then this is something that Joseph's writings actually will become increasingly valuable, I would expect. From his talks and the question and answers on YouTube in the last decade, one can see that he's really alert to the development of science, technology, business practices, financialization of the built environment, and this really comes from his enduring interest in the practical and the lived experience of architecture in cities. And for this reason, I acknowledge my intellectual debt I owe to him. Joseph's writings are always on a bookshelf just behind me that is close to my desk. And they will always remain there close to me. And thank you, Joseph. And thank you, Desmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Ying.
Right.
Yeah. Now, we should have a tea break now, but we have overrun actually 15 minutes. So what I would suggest is that you could just go freely and grab your coffee or tea, but we will keep on the rotation of the speakers. The next speaker actually is Professor Robert Tavernor. Robert, are you online? Yes.
Yes, good morning, Desmond.
So glad to see you. I was so worried when I got your email this morning, telling me, about the storm.
Yes.
What is the name? I forgot the name.
Oh, yes, it had an Irish name.
Yes. So you are not disrupted by the gale of the wind, 90 miles per hour.
No, I've woken to quite a storm, though.
Okay. So we're very glad to have you. And Robert, as I introduced in the morning, was in fact my senior, and I benefited from his advice. And in fact, he was my external examiner for my PhD dissertation. So he's always been regarded by me as the first disciples of Joseph, and we are the younger ones. So we are very glad to have you. So it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be invited by you, Desmond, and it is a great privilege to have an opportunity to give my own personal tribute to Joseph. I'm sorry, in the end, I decided not to put up any images because I know it can be very difficult juggling several things at once. So I'm sorry, you're just going to have to put up with a view of me as part of this. So I don't know if you want to put anything back else, a picture of Joseph back onto the screen, please. But the title of my tribute is Joseph as Master and Guide. It's in the form of a sketch outline of my journey with him through the 48 years that spanned our relationship, my experience as a young student on his London-based CASA course, and then collaborating with him on publications and a major exhibition. I present this as a testament to his special qualities, his generosity and support, and as a record of some of his academic wide-ranging outcomes you may know less about. Starting with the CASA course, I first encountered Joseph when attending his course on advanced studies in architecture that he was holding in the library of the Royal Academy on London's Piccadilly in 1978. These were held on Wednesdays and ran across 2 academic terms as an elective for 6 students from the Polytechnic of Central London School of Architecture, plus 2 of Joseph's Essex University students. Joseph led the morning seminar, Dalibor Vesely, or an academic philosopher, the afternoon session. I think what was always struck me was that Joseph's session invariably started at a small Italian cafe in the Piccadilly Arcade opposite, where we were invited to join him as he enjoyed a black coffee with a side plate carrying a large spoonful of clotted cream, which he would add to his coffee as he went. It was a memorable starting ritual to the day. Of course, Joseph is all about rituals. His seminars progressed through examinations of the great classical architectural treatises by Vitruvius to Leon Battista Alberti and Palladio, with some deviations via Abbot Suger and concluding with Loger at the start of Enlightenment. Dalibor's afternoon sessions examined Enlightenment texts, our earliest seminars considered Vitruvius's classical column types. As well as scrutinizing key sections of the treatises, we reviewed the commentaries of the principal Greek and Roman philosophers and critiques of them by key scholars through history. Large folios of drawings were pulled off the library shelves and pored over. For a 24-year-old architecture student, it was an intellectually thrilling, challenging, and daunting time. Coincident with this seminar series in 1979, Joseph had been commissioned to guest edit a double edition of the magazine Architectural Design as a monograph on Alberti. At one seminar, Joseph asked us whether anyone would be interested to work with him on a restoration of Alberti's San Sebastiano in Mantua for this monograph. Fortunately, I was the only student to raise a hand, and I was on board. Consequently, I met Joseph each week at his flat on Wedderburn Road, where I began a privileged intellectual, social, close pupil and master relationship that continued with fluctuating levels of engagement across 5 decades. The first 2 decades with him were centered on Alberti. The initial education for Joseph and my reconstruction work with him on Alberti's San Sebastiano led me in 79-80 to Italy on the Rome Scholarship, an exceptional opportunity that Joseph encouraged, rather than taking up a scholarship in the US at that time. That allowed me to immerse myself in Italian culture, past and present. I believe seeing so many wonderful buildings then tuned my eyes to beauty. While I was away, Joseph moved his academic base from Essex to Cambridge University. I returned to the UK, where he supervised my doctoral studies at Cambridge on Alberti's definition of congenitas and architectural beauty between the years 1980-83. While working on my PhD, we continued our close relationship and discussed other Alberti-related projects. The first was a new English translation of Alberti's architectural treatise. While a good parallel text, Latin modern Italian edition of Alberti's treatise was available, there was no Latin English edition. Joseph had, of course, introduced and edited James Leone's English edition to a wider readership for Taranti in 1955. We asked Neil Leach, then an undergraduate student and whose diploma thesis I was supervising, whether he would work directly with Joseph on the initial translation. Neil had the proficiency and temperament for the task, and Joseph funded his contribution with an advance from the MIT Press. The translation was finally published after considerable input by the 3 of us in 1988. I also talked to him about a major exhibition on Alberti to, again, promote him. Most people were still very ignorant about the man. The idea for this grew in scale and ambition such that by the late 1980s, Joseph had convinced the Italian company Olivetti to fund an exhibition. By 1987, I had taken up a lectureship in architecture at the University of Bath, and so Joseph and I established what we called the Alberti Group circa 1989-90 in an office in central Bath. By then, Joseph had moved to the University of Pennsylvania, but kept London as his principal home. We engaged students from Bath and Penn to work part-time on initial study drawings of Alberti's buildings. Olivetti liked where we were heading and increased their financial commitment, providing us with state-of-the-art computers. We used computers to produce 3D reconstructions of buildings and paintings, 15th century urban contexts and fly-throughs, as well as to digitally guide the latest computer model cutting machines, led in Italy by the model maker and restorer with a happy name, Felice Ragazzo. Felice had restored Brunelleschi's linewood model of the dome of Florence Cathedral and was well up to the task. The models for the exhibition were also built in linewood by him, with some huge, and some were huge, particularly that of Alberti's Tempio Malatestiano, which was the size of a Fiat car. With Joseph in pen, the original Casa course had ceased, and we established the Centre for Advanced Studies in Architecture, Casa research group at Bath University, focused on classical architecture. Started other English translation of key treatises, classical treatises, and 3D computer reconstructions of historic buildings and computer animations for major exhibitions at the Royal Academy and the City of Bath itself. It was at this time that Professor Desmond Huey visited me in Bath from Cambridge to discuss collaborating on projects together, which sadly came to nothing. The Alberti group moved with me to the University of Edinburgh in '92, where I took up the chair in architecture. And there we completed our research and supplying visual material for the exhibition. This opened at the Palazzo Te in Mantua and was opened by the President of the Republic, accompanied by an impressive cavalcade, of course, being Italy, in the spring of 1995. Joseph was thrilled and full of anticipation at the opening, but very put off by the local Italian politicians who flocked around the president and elbowed him out of the way as the president toured the exhibition, relegating Joseph to a more distant secondary group. Joseph and his wife, Anne Engel, worked closely on assembling and editing the exhibition catalogue. Anne, you may know, was trained as a lawyer, but met him when she was working in publishing. I eventually completed my own monograph on Alberti for Yale University Press, which was published in 1998, which brought together my PhD work with Joseph and our research for the Alberti exhibition. It contains illustrations of the linewood exhibition models. So to Joseph and Anne, Joseph was complimented by his second wife, Anne. They were a formidable team, intellectually and socially. I was hugely fortunate again that Anne recommended that Thames and Hudson commission me to work on the book Palladio and Palladianism as part of their World of Art series. This was before the exhibition work through the Alberti group started, and the book was published in '91. In the acknowledgements to Palladio and Palladianism, I thanked Anne for her initial faith in me, and Joseph for being my intellectual father. There I acknowledged Joseph, as Palladio had Vitruvius, as my master and guide. I was immensely fortunate to have Joseph as not only my master and guide through the great European architectural treatises from Vitruvius onwards, but as my close colleague and friend. During the latter part of the 1990s, George Dodds and I compiled and edited a Festschrift for Joseph, derived from a symposium held at the University of Pennsylvania in '96 in honor of his 75th birthday. This was published as Body and Building, Essays on the Changing Relationship of Body and Architecture by the MIT Press in 2002. Our relationship continued, and while I tried to return as much of the good grace and fortune that he had granted me, he gave me, of course, immeasurably more. What he gave to architecture, indeed, was what matters most. He was finally rewarded in 2014 by the RIBA with the Royal Gold Medal for Architecture, one of only 4 historians to have received this award. And in the same year, the late Queen made him Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Personally and more humbly, I thank Joseph for a wonderfully rich and varied lifelong experience. And I thank you all for permitting me to make this tribute to him today. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Now, our next speaker is Yasmin Shariff, and let me just get Trevor here. So it's Yasmin's turn now. So, yeah.
Okay, sure. Ready to go? Yes, sir. Okay, we're ready to recommence. A great delight to introduce my dear friend and long-term colleague and conspirator, Yasmin Shariff. Yasmin is a singular architectural intelligence. Everything from working at the gallery at the Ismaili Center in London, through her own studies, own graduate work, and so on, teaching at Westminster University, and now continuing the practice of her late husband, Dennis Sharp. Yasmin is a constant voice for social action and for a considered approach to the built environment. Yasmin Shariff, take it away.
Yasmin, are you there? You have muted yourself. Could you unmute? Yasmin might have stepped away from the Zoom, maybe. Yeah. Thinking that we have overrun. So,
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
oh, okay. All right. Yep. Great.
Sorry, I just went to get a cup of tea. Right. Yeah, you're overrun. So what time?
Sorry, we are now at 3:45 p.m. in Hong
Right.
Kong. Yeah, used to be 7:45 a.m.
Yes.
in London. Yes.
Yes, yes.
So good morning to you.
Good morning. Good
Yasmin,
morning.
hello, it's Trevor. I just gave you a fulsome introduction without you, but I'll save it for in person next time I see you. Thanks.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Right. Sorry, I need to get my PowerPoint. Let me just, sorry, I'm actually I could probably do it without it, but it'd be good to I was all early and then suddenly the time vanished.
Yeah. Don't worry. Take your time.
Okay.
We have catch up actually on the schedule now. So yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll just get my presentation up. Seconds. It's just brilliant. Okay, I've just got to share screen now, don't I? Can I share screen? Is that okay? Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, Catherine, we have your screen up.
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, okay, great.
Just full-size image.
Yeah, I'm just why is it? Okay. Voila. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Apologies for my delayed entry. It's an absolute privilege to be here. Thank you so much, Desmond and Trevor, for inviting me to contribute for this celebration. Both he and Anne were great friends, and I've known them for many, many years. And of course, I was in great awe of Joseph's command of languages and breadth of knowledge. He was such a brilliant intellectual mind, and his cut through the world made me see things in a very, very different light, especially this sugar-coated image of London, that the city that he lived in for most of his life. Joseph was, of course, the first architectural critic to win the RIBA Gold Medal. He was awarded that in 2014. And he was president of CIPSH for many, many years, CIPSH being the Committee of International Architectural Critics, at a time when architectural critics have faded from public gaze. His book, The Idea of the Town, which he published in, most of you know, in 1963, looks at cities very differently. And it was really revolutionary because at the time he was writing it, the emphasis was on numbers and researching what the minimum space standards for human beings to inhabit a house would be. And so the focus was not on the fabric of social life. The focus was on creating reports like the Parker-Morris report, which then set up minimum standards, space standards, and the richness of Joseph's thinking, and obviously there were others as well, like Aldo van Eyck, really eroded and were overtaken by the technocrats of this world. And I'm going to quote a little bit from Joseph's essay that was republished by the AJ when he died. It was a short essay from 2012, but I think it sort of sums up where we are now. Joseph was talking about Starchitecture and Starchitects, and this is London Battersea Power Station. I don't know if you can see my pointer, and Frank Gehry's housing, and I can't remember who these two blocks are, but Sir Joseph writes, criticism may seem irrelevant to any talk about buildings at this high point of architecture. After all, the business of a critic is to discriminate, the better for the worse, or, if you like, the more beautiful from the uglier, the more valuable from the less, separate the wheat from the chaff, in short. But Starchitecture can't have much truck with such distinctions. It is content to just be. Celebrity seems to rise above carping discriminators. And he goes on to write, what, after all, can be said in terms of architectural criticism of these sheer walls of standard glass and steel elements, enclosing floors of almost identical plans? Perhaps some comment on the foyer or on the finial of a skyscraper may count as such. But for the most part, any talk about such buildings is limited to fulsome commendations. So I think the result of the lack of critical engagement about new developments is so evident just in this image, where if you walk down a sidewalk, there's no cover, the infrastructure is absolutely soulless, and this is how we are building our new cities. On the fringe of it, there are little parks and walkways on the river, but those are like little incrustations on the side of a very rotten core, where the emphasis is really on how much you can cram in and get the most return for. No one's saying that you can't make money out of development, but it's at what cost? And meanwhile, of course, we're all facing this planetary crisis. And the criticism of the aesthetic nuances of architecture is puerile in relation to the two critical issues we face, climate change and inequality. Architectural criticism cannot be divorced from social, political, and economic forces that control and shape cities and the societies that inhabit them, which the idea of the city, I would argue, is at the core of. With cities mushrooming, biodiversity diminishing and equality increasing, resources depleting and greenhouse gas emissions causing havoc, we have been catapulted into the Anthropocene, an area rooted in post-war consumerism, where human activity is making exponential dramatic impact on planet Earth. We're under attack. Fires, floods, droughts, bombings, riots, plagues are continually in the news. The rate of destruction and loss is unsustainable. And our lifestyle is pivotal in the Anthropocene, as most of humanity now lives in cities. Their shape and form determine the lifestyle and consumption making this impact. So the idea of the town could not be more important and critical now than when it was written. And Joseph offers a way in this essay, a way for the critic to be an ally, not a foe. And earlier last year, Seeker was actually disbarred from the UIA Congress. It was the first time that Seeker has not had a representation at a UIA Congress. And ironically, of course, it says leave no one behind, but certainly they were leaving the critics behind. And so Joseph was, in his essay, was saying, and again, how is the structure related to the materiality of the building? And how does any fancy configuration relate to the way it sits in the environment? And so the focus on critics just talking about fancy buildings is, I think, something that we have to move on from. So, and so Joseph says, and what, if any, is the contribution it makes to the composite image of the city, of which it is constituent? So the critic is further justified in inquiring about how a building is perceived, both by its users and the public, since all such reactions form part of the critical arsenal. And perhaps my military metaphor is not quite opposite. In English, we are not used to that idea, but the French respect what they call critique militante, which we might more gently translate as engaged criticism. It might almost qualify as an oxymoron, since we often see the critic as detached, above the fray, calmly formulating judgments and not engaging in jousts or disputes. But we, as critics, are not being befriended. There was an opportunity to contribute, but we just weren't there and nobody noticed. And so Joseph goes on in his essay to say, well, you know, it's all very well, but who will it really matter to? And I think when you see the figures, it's very clear that it matters to people shaping cities, and it's those cities in the G20 countries. And and it's those who commission those projects. So again, quoting from Joseph, perhaps more important, I feel he's writing my script for me, actually. Perhaps more important is the effect on those commissioning buildings who tend to think of themselves as patrons or even public benefactors. And so finding any carping at the product of their benevolence, they see it as impugning their good name. And such hazards do suggest that the critic's words are not all in vain, and that beyond any resentment, they may promote reflection and may even lead participants in the building process to modify or turn their ways. And we've seen how people like Jane Jacobs, Mumford, I mean, all of these critics have had a very fundamental impact. And we can't continue to have this level of consumption, which is illuminated here. But it stems from the whole idea of the garden city, which is very low density. And that idea of the city is just not viable. It leads to segregated areas. And this is my hometown of Nairobi, which was planned as a garden city. And it was planned as a segregated garden city. And so those ideas of having industry and housing and all of these uses in segregated areas is just not working. We've got to find a way of knitting this all together so that all of humanity can live on Earth in a much more equitable way. And this vision of the garden city and the kind of twee little English house and with its rose-fronted porch is just not viable. And this low-density battle of style has blighted British architecture ever since the 1989 publication of The Vision of Britain. And this has given house builders a license to die stamp out these twee little houses that are absolutely devastating in terms of all of their carbon emissions, their poor quality lifestyle, the stress they put on public services, etc. I could go on. And because it was so bad, they felt they had to get a beauty commission, which Roger Scruton headed up, and that soon faded. And this was a prankster who renamed Poundbury. I haven't photoshopped this, I promise, but it was just shows the sentiment because they're out of scale and not appropriate. Whilst we focus, while architectural criticism in Britain is focused on these sorts of developments, London is literally burning. And I'm not going to talk about Grenfell, we all know about it, but the level of pollution, landfill, and it's so shocking that in London you will see people sleeping on the streets everywhere. And this is in the city of London, the most one of the most wealthiest places on earth, and this is what we've got. And because the idea of the town has just faded out of our horizon, and it's all just being capitalized. And it's affecting us in every way, the air we breathe, and we cannot sustain that kind of lifestyle. And the organizations that are there to help make the transformation, so this is the UN's emissions report, I had a look at the contributors, and there was not one single architect. How could you talk about cities and buildings without having the input of architects and architectural critics? It's completely bonkers. And so you get, technocrats, the efficiency of the building shell. Where are the people in all of this? They're completely missing. And so I just wanted to end with some of the ideas that could maybe help us move forward, particularly Hammersby in Sweden. But of course, there's a whole idea that Paolo Soleri did with Arcosanti, with architecture and ecology, and Bill Dunst has done here with Bedzen. But the criticism and the critique on all of these very significant developments that deal with holistically with the social infrastructure and the fabric that Joseph talks about in The Idea of the Town, his very first book, seems to be completely forgotten. So I hope this symposium will start many other thoughts and actions going. And yeah, thank you very much, Joseph, for opening my mind and world in a very different way to the technocratic Parker Morris culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. So, Trevor, you want to introduce the next speaker, or is Francesca Muzzillo? Okay, all right. Thank you, Yasmin. And now we have our next speaker. In fact, the following two speakers are from Italy. All right. Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Francesca. Our iCloud was just upgrading the last 2 seconds. That's why it was suddenly there was a, a switch over. Yeah. So we are back on with all of you, and Francesca Muzzillo is a full professor of environmental design and technology of architecture at the Università Luigi Vermitali in Naples, Italy. In fact, we knew each other actually when I was a student at Cambridge, and Francesca was invited to visit the Martin Center, where she did the research work. And then we always hang around, with the other MPhil and PhD students. And we had actually a great time in these years in Cambridge. And we kept on our contact actually ever since. And I have actually worked with Francesca on some publication together over the years. And she is now actually directing research groups on environmental design, on the integration of natural elements into the building systems, naturalistic engineering, eco-museums, wine landscapes, and strategy for flood prevention. So all sounds fantastic. So, let me now hand over, the platform to Francesca.
Good morning or good evening to everybody. I don't know. And my experience, can you hear me? Yes? Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
My experience of today began almost 40 years ago. I was very young and I was invited to come to Cambridge by Joseph Rykwert. He used to come to Naples and he was a close friend of my design teacher, Marcello Angrisani. So I met him in Naples firstly, and then he invited me as a young visitor to Martin Center in Cambridge almost 40 years ago. And there I had the opportunity of attending his lessons of the Master of Theory of Architecture. And there I met Desmond, who has been for these 40 years, a friend and an academic colleague in a lot of experience. The last one was on Calvino's interpretation by students, both on my university and this university, in during pandemic, the idea of bounding the students closely in their room, one in Hong Kong, one in Naples, but with the same desire of sharing something. And Calvino, you know, is very bound to Joseph, because his book is probably was inspired by Joseph theories. Now just a minute. I have a problem because they say that I cannot share my. They say only the organizer can authorize to for my Desmond.
Yeah, we have now made you a co-host, so you can share now.
Okay. Okay. Is it? And the title of my presentation, which is very quick, is Antique Books and Indelible Instruments for Teaching. Because when I firstly met Joseph in Naples, he was with my teacher, and Joseph was fond of Naples, antique bookshops. In the historical center of Naples, we have a lot of antique bookshops. These are some pictures of antique bookshops in Naples. And Joseph used to come here and going around these antique books and rare books. And my teacher used to go with him and showing the best places where to buy books. And when I arrived in Cambridge and I attended the lessons of these masters, where I met also Desmond, one thing was very impressive. Joseph obviously had a lot of slides, even if they were different kind of slides compared with the one we have now with the iPad and computer. But he had a lot of slides on treatise and on antique architecture. And on the same time, what impressed me was very often he used to come to this small group of students and researchers with one book. And this was one of his collection books, sometimes also antique book, rare book, probably one bought or in Europe. Why not? Also, it could have been bought in Naples. And it's very interesting to think that now I'm 60, I'm very old now, but when I think of culture, the idea of architectural culture, for me, this idea is strictly bound to these books. The presence of books in the rooms, the small rooms in which he used to give a lecture. And these books were physically present of culture. And this was something which I have learned by Joseph. And even if I don't have rare antique expensive books. I only have books bought when I was young in Europe, Triangle in Paris, and it was very difficult at that time buying books, because you had to carry these books, the heavy of this book with you, because there was no Amazon, nothing to order staying at home. And when I teach to students, it's a kind of you know, a reminder of that time. And even if they are not read book, it's every time I give a lecture to students, lessons, I take with me one book, one of the books I bought when I was young, and I show them directly from this book. And this is very, you know, is a way of like something unforgettable. And I know that my students like this. They are more, they are like more involved with the presence of this book. So that was what I wanted to say, to stress in this presentation, the idea of what
Francesca,
yeah.
are you sharing your screen? Because we don't see the share screen.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Do you see them?
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet.
Now we see.
Oh, I show again. I show again so it's the title of my presentation, and these are the picture. Can you see them?
Yeah, we can now.
These are the picture of the antique bookshops in Naples. Joseph used to visit with my teacher, design teacher, and these are only one image everyone know, which remind me of the period of lessons by Joseph, even if I have said that what I remember is the physical presence of the books. And now, when I finished my period of 1 year in Cambridge, I returned to Italy, and I had my PhD in environmental design in Polytechnic of Milan. And what I've studied at the time of Cambridge had a different meaning at that time, because I began to study in Cambridge with Joseph, the idea of antique, Roman architecture, antique foundation, also Italian foundation of architecture. And on the other side, I used to visit all the English landscape garden on weekend with Desmond, who was very kind and used to guide all along England, and visiting antique landscape, 18th century landscape garden. And in Polytechnic of Milan, I returned the idea of 18th century theory of nature and design nature, environmental design nature, with the meaning of the idea of designing as at the same time nature itself had designed. And along the years, my academic profession, my academic experience, as I had, starting from this point, a lot of addressing to the sustainable ecological approach. But, and on the other hand, the attention to antique forum like in lessons of Joseph. This is one compared one student of mine drawings, and this is obviously the wonderful drawing by Le Corbusier in Pompeii. And my husband, who is not anymore, he passed more than 10 years ago, was studied Pompeii as an idea of a city who is still alive, who is not a dead town, but it could be designed again in the same way. And impressed by these two things, in my last work with my colleagues, Caterina Frettoloso and Holger Ken, who is a teacher, but also an architect practicing, we have done just this year these small books on the theme of open space. And what's interesting that I had again at the last, no, not last, but you know, last years of my academic life, returned the things where I started at that time, the time of Cambridge. The idea of antique value of architecture, Roman architecture, with an iconic mental value, a perceptive mental value, and at the same time, the idea of English landscape theory connected together. And so something returned of the period of the lessons by Joseph, when you used to say that, and it was very ironic, I remember when he used to teach, was very serious, very profound, but at the same time, sometimes he stopped and he used to smile, and was very, very ironic. And but he always say, like in the famous his quotation, that there are some non-rational point in an idea of town architecture. And studying open space, my idea is returning to the foundation. It was before Joseph passed, but it returned to me like, you know, when you are older, things, or when you were very young, returns together. And the idea of looking from a non-rational point of view, which is very interesting now. And in my recent study, I try to study to non-rational landscape experience, like here in the center of Italy, in Umbria, this experience of Michelangelo Pistoletto, the artist, with the idea of olive trees put in the sense of infinity, and trying to involve people. As you know, one of the things I remember was that the main idea which I remind of the period of Cambridge lessons by Joseph is the connection of people and architecture. People living in a place, people also being conditioned by place, and at the same time conditioning the places. So these artistic experiences are for me a new way of looking at non-rational point of view. And just want to, I want to stop my presentation and just a minute.
So, Francesca, can you finish in 2 minutes?
Yeah. Only I have the problem of I wanted to. Anyway, it's not important. I wanted to interrupt my presentation. And can you see me now?
Yes. see you. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to stress the fact that now I really am grateful to Desmond of being with me on a lot of experience during these years, these long years, and of the beginning of our meeting with this huge, very ironic, very soft and profound teaching by Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca.
Ciao.
Ciao. So our next speaker is Professor Michele Sbacchi, who is full professor of architectural design at Palermo University. Now, again, Michele and I knew each other since the Cambridge days.
I'm here.
Yes, and I remember visiting him once in Sicily, in Palermo, and he took me around the city, you know, on his Vespa, you know, scooter, and that was incredible. I mean, it's a very memorable experience for me, you know, to see Sicily and Palermo, you know, on this scooter with Michele. So he actually went to UPenn and was a TA for Joseph, and then he did his postdoc at Palermo, and later got his PhD from Naples. And he has run design workshops in many places of the world, including Abu Dhabi, even Hong Kong, and also in Finland and other very nice exotic places like Seoul and so on. So, Michele, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Desmond. I want first to thank Desmond Hui for this timely and wonderful initiative of this conference, and congratulations for the title that really, I think, is really appropriate. As we know, I want to share my presentation first. Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to focus on a very precise and circumscribed part of Joseph's research. As we know, Joseph's cultural contribution to the history of architecture, to architectural theory, and to criticism of architecture has been immense. His prolific output has led to texts that are not only brilliant, but rich in research that delves into various documentary fields. And we are all well accustomed to seeing the vast, enormous amount of material that he investigated. And this was not only in the field of architecture, but also in those of archaeology, anthropology, ethnography, art, philosophy, I would add religion. Today, as I said, I want to stress on the usefulness of his studies for those involved in design, in other words, for architects. To do this, I need to mention what his fellow and lifelong friend, architect Vittorio Gregotti, has said about him. Joseph Rykwert work is invaluable for us, we architects in particular, who often use his conclusion as the raw material for our project, the raw material. And indeed, several of his ideas form the foundation upon which architectural design can be critically developed. This, at least, has been in the case of my experience. Among the wide range of topics that Joseph has developed, so I would like to focus on the prominence of building-street relationship. And I'm glad that already the issue of people and architecture as an important theme for Joseph has already come up in Francesca Muzzillo presentation, which just preceded mine. Let's go on. That this theme was central to Joseph's interest can be seen in these 10 questions an architectural critic should be asking that Joseph wrote a couple of decades ago. As you can see, the first 5, and therefore the most important probably, questions concern the theme I'm bringing to your attention. How does the building meet the ground? How are pedestrians' entries managed? And how are they separated from vehicles? How on entry does the visitor proceed to upper floors? How are all these bits of circulation related to the declinations from public to semi-public spaces? For him, indeed, the physical space we live in cities cannot be abruptly divided into buildings on one side and streets and squares on the other. He tried to demonstrate the fluidity of these elements and consequently their interplay. In this regard, he paid particular attention to how one enters a building, how one circulates within the building, and how the building is positioned relatively to the street. His idea was that the street was the seat of institutionalized movement. Of course, I'm talking about the movement of pedestrians and not that of cars. So he wrote in this regard, for the street is human movement institutionalized, an individual may clear or mark out a path in a wilderness, but unless he is followed by others, his path never becomes a road or a street, because the road and the street are social institutions, and it is their acceptance by the community that gives them the name and the function with which I am concerned. And therefore, this movement was continuous and fluid. From the street, literally, the movement continues into the building, the movement of the users, of course. Therefore, doors and entrance halls must be regarded as very important parts of the building. This is what he wrote about this subject. If you look at the entrance halls of the skyscrapers of the 20s and the 30s, they are very welcoming. They are public spaces with enormous amounts of display and marble and so on. They are events of the street. The building was therefore an extension of the street, and as a consequence, the building should be adjacent to it. He criticized, of course, the separation often created by parking lots that were placed in front of buildings. This is what he wrote. Buildings present themselves as physically remote and isolated behind barriers of parking. In doing so, he was admitting his particular condition. As we all know, Joseph did not drive at all. My view of such matters is probably conditioned by my disability. I'm not, nor have I ever been a driver. And that's what he writes about his house in Venice. It's not by chance that he wanted to buy a house in Venice, the drive-less city. I was very lucky because Anne and I bought a flat in Venice after we gave up Philadelphia. I don't have a driver's license, and Anne was determined that I would walk as far as possible because I'm very lazy. The intrusion of the street into the building implied a hierarchy of spaces that gradually becomes more public, then semi-public, and finally private. This drawing by Iap Bakema, an architect very close to Joseph, is an architect of the Team 10, as we all know, clearly illustrates this conception. For Rykwert, however, the street was also a symbolic space, a place where a ritual was made explicit. In a seminal essay on street, actually published 3 times, he explored its dimension. This essay was changed its title, was Street History, and then was changed into learning from the street, but basically was the same writing. Here we can see a page from that article where the city is depicted as a place of celebration of peacemaking, for a celebration of peacemaking, a ritual celebration. For Rykwert, but obviously not just for him, as we will see, the city was also the place of leisure, the place of play, in other words, a playground, as his friend Aldo van Eyck, also an architect of Team 10, used to say. In this image, which is also taken from the essay I mentioned before, which was published first in the 70s, we see children playing the Tin Can Tommy play in a place, I think, in England. This photo inevitably reminds us the photos by Nigel Anderson, photos of children playing in the East End of London. Anderson, together with the Smithsons and the artist Eduardo Paolozzi, was part of the independent group in the 50s. Joseph's involvement in this group, whether direct or indirect, is undeniable. And so, roughly, we can say from the 50s, sometime before and onwards, Rykwert was in close contact with all these figures who criticized the functionalism of the Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne and looked elsewhere. In his own words, I grew up in the breakup of Chiam, even as a student. I had been dissatisfied with the teaching I had received, which was entirely colored by the rationalistic heritage, even in its coy British reduction. I began looking to historical precedent and at alternative approaches to the way many related to their environment, particularly to those which were being investigated by anthropologists. Perhaps the city was not an assembly of well-planned housing units, but something that required a different kind of inquiry. And certainly the publication in 1955 of Tris Tropiques by Claude Lévi-Strauss had a great impact on him. This made him sympathetic and friend this made him sympathetic to the themes developed by another person fascinated by anthropology, Aldo van Eyck. Let us not forget that the first condensed edition of Idea of Town was published actually in a special issue of the journal Forum, famously directed by Aldo van Eyck. That was the most famous journal for the Team 10. And we can't overlook that the Idea of Town was subtitled The Anthropology of Urban Form in Rome, Italy, and the Ancient World. Under this light, Gregotti's definition of Rykwert as an anthropologist of architectural history is quite appropriate. To this, I could add that Joseph himself once told me rather modestly, you see, everything I've done can be summarized in a simple operation. I only added Lévi-Strauss to Wickover. To better understand Rykwert's interest in the relationship between the street and the building, between users and the buildings, it is useful to make an example that concerns the different ways Joseph judged the buildings of two great architects. One who was completely distant from his ideas, Mies van der Rohe, and another one who was much closer to them, James Stirling. Joseph criticized both Mies' buildings and his way of working, as we all know. Mies, for him, belonged to a generation that failed to consider the users and adhered to a mistaken notion of function. Rykwert wrote about Mies. Mies was totally oblivious of the social context of his buildings, both as objects and as processes. and completely uninterested in the form of the city. He set out to be the virtuoso of constructional detail and succeeded. He built very good buildings, but ignoring most of the reasons why buildings are put up at all. As he got older, the demands of the occupants for body comfort, for some physical contact with and control over the environment, seemed increasingly irrelevant to his main preoccupation with the construction process. And that's what Joseph writes about function. Previous generations blind objects to what used to be called function. By this was meant a demand of buildings users organized into a sequential narrative, usually by means of a diagram. This narrative organization seemed to guarantee for about half a century the reputation of a building. Many architects, and Mies among them, believed they might ascertain what the user's needs really were, nor about how the transition between needs stated and this built satisfaction was to be made. Completely different was Stirling's approach. First of all, we can see some telling photos of this attitude. These are photos that comes from James Stirling archive, which is now at the Canadian Centre of Architecture. And there are very many photos of some of the buildings realized. And these buildings are always full of people and mainly populated by children. Are these the same children as Preston Housing Complex? Are these children the same as in Anderson photos? We don't know. But the message is clear. Probably there was a subtle irony in Stirling photos because they quite remind of Anderson's. They are black and white also. But the message is clear. The people is the most important part of the building. Rykwert was sympathetic, of course, to this approach of Stirling. And he found, he gave a very interesting interpretation of his designs because he found in the evolution of Stirling's design, especially in the pedestrian path, that starting from Oxford Building became the cornerstone of a later project, particularly those for the German Museum. His interpretation is quite interesting, therefore. On one side, there were buildings like Cambridge, which are object buildings, and these are the famous buildings of the first part of the career of James Stirling. So on one side, object-like buildings, and this led to other buildings similar to these. On the other side, and those were the most interesting ones for Joseph, there were the buildings that made the interplay with the pedestrians, interplay with the access as the main cornerstone and main important part of the building. And it is what happens, starts with the Oxford Building that, as you know, reverts its side towards a pedestrian path along the river as much as the river itself as a path, and doesn't relate to the road. And this goes into the sequence of the German Museum, the later German Museum, Cologne, Stuttgart, Dortmund, and here we can see in photos. Rykwert's interest in street is further exemplified by something that has been so far, I think, not sufficiently looked at, is an event that happened in the 70s. Which relates to his involvement in the Streets project, which was developed at the Institute of Architecture and Urban Studies in New York under the leadership of Peter Eisman. That was really at the beginning of the IAUS. The project was conceived as a collaborative effort focused on streets. After a phase of analysis and study, it was intended to be applied in an urban project in Binghamton, New York, and it was actually done, these projects. Joseph was invited, and it is in this context that the essay on streets, to which I often referred so far, was initially developed. But it was much longer. Apparently, Joseph made a much longer research on street, but this was somehow cut. Based on the notes which I can show you, these are notes that comes from, again, from the archive of the Canadian Centre of Architecture. You can see this is no preparatory notes of the work on this project streets, and there were people participating, all the people of the Institute of Architecture and Urban Studies. Therefore, there was Anthony Bidler, Kenneth Frampton, Michael Grace, Peter Eisman, Diana Agres, and so on and so forth. And you can see that I put an arrow to see that Rykwert material was a big part of the preparatory material given to people to investigate. And same applies here. Point 2, the discussion of Rykwert research topics have been based on contemporary city and so on and so forth. And again, the elaboration of Rykwert material. So it seems that his role was really important.
Michele,
and also
2 minutes
yes,
more.
yeah,
Okay.
yes, I'm going to finish. Yes, sure. And so Rykwert's contribution in this event had a significant impact. However, despite this, Rykwert does not appear to have been involved in the later stages of the project. Nevertheless, the final result appeared to align with his original ideas, particularly in the emphasis of integration of buildings and street. These are drawings from the project in which you can see that all the issues of private, public, intrusion of the street within the building is all taken very seriously by those who made the project. And to finish, I want just to quote once again Joseph. The new city for which I long is now the one that will give me a sense of where I stand under the sky. It must show itself to be friendly to me, user-friendly, as some industries say nowadays. It must give a value for my bodily presence. Celebrate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele. Now, we come to the last presenter, Lawrence Nield. Lawrence actually is in Sydney, Australia. So I think it's now the evening time. And I invited Lawrence to be the last speaker because with his experience and his relationship with Joseph, he would be probably a very suitable presenter to present for the last session and also somehow sum up, our symposium. And he studied actually Cambridge under Joseph from 1967 to 69, and then remained a close friend and jointly owning an apartment in Venice. And that's actually his talk today, Joseph Rykwert and Venice. And of course, Lawrence is a very senior and experienced practitioner. He led the master planning team for the Sydney Olympics and designed many Olympic venues in London, Beijing, and Athens. And in 2007, he received the French Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters. And in 2012, he was awarded the Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal. So this is like an equivalent of the Royal Gold Medal in Australia. And he was a former professor of architecture at the University of Newcastle in Sydney, and chairman of the New South Wales Heritage Council and government architect of the Northern territory. So Lawrence.
Desmond, thank you. You can hear me all right?
Yes, very well.
I've got a couple. Firstly, thank you and Trevor for inviting me. I'm flattered that I can pull such an incredibly distinguished group together, but hopefully we'll focus on a few points. I've got a few slides. I can put those up. Can I? Well, by just using the share thing
Yes.
on my.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but I won't. They'll come at the end. Again, thank you, and what a splendid way of celebrating Joseph. I first met Joseph in 1966 with a scholarship from the University of Sydney. I'd elected to go to Cambridge. Sir Leslie Martin was the professor, and Sandy Wilson, later the professor, was the live wire. They had recently given Corb an honorary doctorate. The students all echoed his words as he walked through the streets of Cambridge. A Bale Academy, down with the academy. I mumbled things about large-scale prefabrication to Leslie Martin, but said to Sandy I was really interested in building and meaning. I was very influenced by the extraordinary writings of Adrian Stokes. He said I should talk to Joseph Rykwert, who was then the librarian at the Royal College of Art. There would be no problem getting him to be my tutor in Cambridge if I got on.
Lawrence, are you sharing your screen now?
No, I haven't done it yet.
Oh, you haven't done it yet. Okay, all right, yeah.
No, they're only coming at the end.
Okay, all right.
Joseph asked me to join a small seminar on building and meaning he was running with George Baird and Charles Jenks, who were then at the AA. This proved wide-ranging but focused my thinking. And in spring 1967, Joseph asked me to join him in the American school in Rome, directed by Frank Brown, to dig in the Forum Romanum. For a young graduate, this was a dolce vita, digging in the morning, coffee and gelato in the corso at lunch, siesta, and then a little bit more digging in the evening. And in that digging, we discovered a few roof tiles, and I got interested in the temple roofs, and more particularly the timber structures that, of course, no longer exist in temple roofs. And more interestingly, as I went further, in the deliberate holes in the roofs in temples, particularly Greek temples, particularly tiles with holes in them. I was on my way with Joseph. He was very interested too. We must thank Joseph for his teaching in architecture school all over the world, his guidance to graduate students, and particularly his project comments and assistance for many distinguished architects and practitioners, including myself, where I'd quite often send sketches of buildings to Joseph and he'd give perceptive comments. But let me just quickly talk about two books of his books that greatly influenced me and have been talked at in various different dimensions at this conference. The Idea of the Town. Architects travelling or working in Europe now know about the cosmology of the Roman city and many European cities today. They can now walk along the Cardo, knowing the sun turned around the axis, and tracing along the Decumanus, they follow the course of the sun. Great figures of thought and science help us understand urbanism in this rich discourse. This is both a history of architecture and a history of cities. Why is it called the idea of the town, I wonder? Why isn't it the idea of a city? Towns, Joseph said, are machines for thinking with. And I quote Joseph, the divine protector or protectress was part of a metaphysical defensive apparatus, such as the formula and the rites of their potropaic monuments. Potropaic is, as you know, monuments averting evil. And they had a magical function. But all these protective aids, whether physical or magical, were always part of a bigger unity. And the unity was social and religious, not magical phenomenon. Its aim was not just to conserve, but to nourish and fortify. Even the magical apotropos was a function of the greater whole, of the town as a machine for thinking with, an instrument for understanding the world and the human predicament in it. Those words have echoed through my long career. The dancing column. Just if I can get my screen back. The dancing column. The body column metaphor is as old as architectural thought, informing the works of Vitruvius, Alberti, and many later writers. But the dancing column is the first comprehensive treatment of this huge subject, and it provides a critical examination of Western architecture for nearly 3 millennia. Joseph opens with a review of the consequences for the leading architects of the 20th century and the 21st century, and then traces ideas related to them in accounts of the ancient world. The body column metaphor is traced in archaeological material from Egypt, Asia Minor, the Levant, and as well as from Greece, drawing on the recent accounts by historians of Greek religion and society, as well as his latest discovery of archaeology. Joseph re-examines body column significance for building and meaning and for a theoretical view of architecture. I greatly enjoyed The Judicious Eye and The Brothers Adam, but they didn't influence me as much as The Seduction of Place, coming out in 2000, his most popular book, Why New York is the Capital of the World, How to Prevent Houstonization of Cities, and why metaphor is essential to the way we occupy the world. His detailed criticism of the London Eye. The Seduction of Place was published before the dreadful 9/11, but in later editions there is a razor-sharp epilogue considering 9/11. I quote, "Many such issues have surfaced in the often acrimonious discussions about the various different futures being thrust at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. The site opened by the catastrophe of 9/11, when the terrorists cruelly but unwittingly reaffirmed the metaphor power of building. Many voices opposed the absolute cash nexus over the rebuilding, the return to the skyline of a form that would proclaim its developers' right to draw maximum profit from the site would do just that. They therefore urged the claim of a memorial to commemorate the dead, and perhaps more positively, the assertion of civic pride and public utility over private gain. Because Manhattan remains the world capital, these debates and their outcome will matter beyond New York for the whole world." And they have certainly affected the whole world. Placelessness. I think it was in 1995 or 96, Penn had a fetchriff for Joseph, bringing together an extraordinary range of scholars and architects, from Ivan Illich to Charles Correa. I was a humble minor participant. Again and again, speakers returned to the sense of place. The idea of a town explores the anthropology, as we've just seen, of ancient towns and how it relates to modern urban design. It reflects a common theme throughout his work, the concept of creating a sense of place, which often drew, if I could speculate, on his own experiences of displacement at the age of 13, when he and his parents escaped from Warsaw to London on the eve of the Second World War. Our many sad public places are the failure not of paving, but of architecture. Placelessness erodes most of our cities and towns. Everywhere, infrastructure comes before social space. Stopping placelessness is a recurring theme in Joseph's teaching and writing. Now, if I could just switch on to some slides. Is that visible?
Yes, yes.
Yep. Venice, a mystery. Joseph lived in Venice with Italo Calvino in the 1950s. Italo Calvino was, as you know, he was influenced by Joseph and also was an influence on Joseph. In 2000, my wife and I joined with Joseph, Rykwert and Anne to buy an apartment in Venice. We sold, and this is it that you can see in the slide, in San Giove in Cannaregio. We sold it, I think, in 2015 after Anne died and Joseph could no longer manage. He always moved with many books. Our apartment in Cannaregio was lucky to be there, as it was where Le Corbusier had designed his extraordinary hospital with roof gardens and ramps. In Venice, he and Anne were men and women about town. They went to all the Biennale vernissages, they saw the Gregottis, and they attended Biennales assiduously. He was awarded the Bruno Zevi Prize in Architectural History in 2000 by the Architectural Biennale. He taught occasionally at UAV, and he advised Peggy Guggenheim. In the long northern wall of our apartment living room was floor-to-ceiling books. As you can expect, there were two Elaine grey chairs that we could relax in looking over our garden. This is the view from our bedrooms onto the main Cannaregio Canal. And this is the beautiful garden we had at the back. We had the upper stories. We had no problems with Aqua Alta. The lower floors were used as stores, not by us. We hired them out. It was a beautiful building, and we went to Venice for nearly 15 years, backwards and forwards. My wife and I generally came in the winter and spring because there was the summer in Australia, and Joseph came in the summer and at Biennale time. Every couple of years, we were together with Joseph, and Joseph would welcome us to the most beautiful city in the world. There is no placelessness in Venice. Joseph knew everything about Venice, how Ruskin changed our perception of Venice, where Palladio lived, the relationship between Palladio and Sansovino, Palladio's work with Veronese on the wedding at Cana, the ghetto and its high-rise, the Roman origins of San Giorgio Maggiore. We walked endlessly. But why is there only a passing mention of Venice in Joseph's 11 books? And I've been to many of his lectures, and he also didn't mention Venice. I suspect, given his intense love of Venice, he was going to write a book about Venice, but age and Anne's death overtook him. Let me finish again. Towns, a machine for thinking with. Joseph showed us how to think about them. Joseph was a major architectural scholar and polemicist. His passing leaves a huge void. Thank you.
publishers, etc. But it's good after this long day. That's my wish. Now, Desmond, why don't we give the last word to you, since you are the initiator, the spark plug of this. I'm the come lately Canadian. Desmond.
Thank you, Trevor. Now, perhaps I would also give a chance for all the speakers online now, if they want to also add something or make a comment, yeah, before we say goodbye to each other. Yeah. Oh, yes. Could you all come? Speakers in the room, please come over to the screen, and we all take a group picture with all the. Can we maybe we sit down? You know, we are hiding the. If anyone online would like to make a comment, you know, feel free. You know, I think we still have a 10-15 minutes. We could use this room.
Could I?
Yes, Yasmin.
Well, congratulations. It's been I've only tuned in to the last bit because most of it was happening while I was asleep. But I really think that Joseph's work is so important at this moment in time, because there is so much building going on that is soulless. And his ideas are so important in so many ways. And I was wondering whether maybe because he was president of CIPSH for so long, that maybe you could speak to Wilfred to see if we could get something out of all of these presentations that actually spotlight a lot of the work that is so relevant today. So that's just an idea that you might want to take up.
Yes, thank you. I think after this, I would again, you know, go around and ask all presenters to send me a revised or refined script if they wish, so that we could all collect and put together as a publication. And suggested by Trevor, yeah. And then we'll see how we could combine it with the CIPSH events, yeah. We want to maintain, you know, the identity of both events, yeah. Yeah. So I think that's what we will do, certainly. Okay. Xing, anything you want to say?
Thank you, Desmond. And I have nothing more to add. But once again, thank you for taking this initiative. And I think there will be a series of events happening on mainland China. And I know some of the journals are going to put up special issues. And I myself will edit an issue of architecture journal in China, and we will discuss an interesting phenomenon concerning Chinese cities. Chinese cities look all the same, but the character of the city, by using a human analogy, needs to be discovered. So you have to scratch the surface. It's not the look of the city silhouette or the skyline, but the nuanced interaction between people and the city and the way of their living. So I think it will be fascinating translation of Joseph's ideas into the Chinese reality. So I'm in the process of putting together a panel, and in spring next year, and they will come to Shanghai Jiaotong University School of Design. And then we will develop papers, and they will publish a special issue. And I'm delighted to say people will come to the School of Design building, which I have designed. So I will keep you posted, and hopefully we'll have also an online channel, and maybe we'll invite some of our colleagues today to join the discussion. Yeah, thank you, Desmond.
Thank you, Xing. We look forward to hearing more about your events in Shanghai. Yeah. And Michele, any further comments? from your side?
Yes, thank you. Just about I want to, since there are going to be a lot of events coming up, I also have heard about something going on in the coming months at the AA in London. I would like to stress that this event should be even in the development in printing, should keep his identity, which is the identity you gave with the title, which, as I already said, I think is very appropriate, because we can look at Joseph work in very different ways. It's so large, so extensive that gives a way to several interpretations. While what has been discussed mostly today relates to this conception of humanities of built heritage, which I think is a very, very interesting idea.
Yes, thank you, Michele. Yeah. And Francesca?
I like to remember that once I told to Joseph, I adore Paris, the grandeur of the streets. And he said, that's what I don't like, Paris. I like the Paris of the people where the streets are not so straight, where people look in the eyes one of the other. So he, in a certain way, corrected me, stressing the idea of people in the place, which is what he was interested much more.
Yes, thank you. And Robert, any more thoughts?
Thank you. Yes, no, I was interested in what Francesca was just saying, because I agree that Joseph always put people first, and that was his real quality, both in terms of his writings and his relationships with them. And that was what was remarkable. And I think, yes, we can all show images of cities which are failing or look like other places, but ultimately it is the people, how they inhabit them, and inhabit them over time, which makes the difference. And I think it's the time aspect that is very difficult for a critic to deal with, because you don't know how people are going to adapt to a place, how they will make it into something better than the original, perhaps planned conception. And I think one has to be optimistic. I am an optimist, and I enjoyed engaging with the recent development of London for that reason. There are lots of faults, but there are lots of good things. But ultimately, it's the people who will make it work. And that's how I remember Joseph.
Great. And finally, Lawrence.
Yes, well, thank you. I think it's been a very wide-ranging discussion. And for someone who is probably one of Joseph's earliest students, graduate students, I'm just so happy to see such understanding and conveyancing of his ideas. And I think that they are timely, that we must have social space and not just placelessness. And he's shown us ways of doing that.
Thank you very much. Now, I think this is the end of our very brief but very valuable and very memorable occasion. And I really look forward to the next time that we might also gather again in one way or the other, either in person or again or in Zoom. But we look forward to this network and the friendship and the goodwill from everyone. And I will be in touch with you regarding this publication and the future development. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond, and yeah, Trevor, thank you. Great,
Yes.
great day.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Cool.
Bye-bye.